The chrome on my 1949 panhead gleamed like a middle finger aimed directly at Brenda's pristine, beige-colored soul. I knew the second I kicked the engine over and let that guttural, primal roar shake the morning dew off the hydrangeas that war was officially declared. How could a machine this beautiful cause so much ugly resentment in a woman whose only hobby was measuring the height of her neighbor's grass with a literal ruler? The humidity of the Florida morning clung to my skin like a wet wool blanket, bringing with it the scent of salt air and overpriced mulch. I wiped a smudge of oil off the fuel tank, feeling the vibration of the idling engine deep in my chest. It was a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that felt a hell of a lot more honest than anything else in this gated community. Then I heard it. The sharp, rhythmic click-clack of designer sandals on the pavement that sounded like a countdown to an explosion. I didn't even have to look up to know Brenda was standing there. Her arms crossed so tightly she looked like she was trying to cut off her own circulation. Her son, a pampered 16-year-old named Tyler who looked like he'd never broken a sweat in his life, stood behind her with his eyes locked on my bike. His expression wasn't one of admiration. It was pure, unadulterated greed. Is that thing really necessary at 7 in the morning? Brenda's voice was a jagged glass shard cutting through the air. I let out a slow, deliberate sigh, watching a puff of exhaust vanish into the humid air. I haven't even left the driveway yet, Brenda, I replied, my voice low and steady despite the irritation prickling at the back of my neck. Tyler stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch the leather saddle. This is the one, he whispered, loud enough for me to hear. You said if I got straight BS, you'd get me a vintage ride. Did he just say what I think he said? I felt a laugh bubbling up. But it wasn't the happy kind. Brenda didn't miss a beat, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me like I was a service provider who had forgotten my place. My son wants the bike, she stated, as if she were ordering a latte at a drive-thru. We checked the HOA bylaws. And since your motorized noise nuisance is technically a violation of the Peace and Quiet Clause, I'm willing to waive your accumulated fines if you just sign the title over to him. It's a fair trade, don't you think? I actually stopped breathing for a second. Was she serious? The sheer, delusional audacity of this woman was a physical weight in the air. This bike is worth more than your husband's midlife crisis Tesla. Brenda, is it? Clicking the kickstand down with a metallic snap that echoed off the stucco walls. And it's not for sale. Let the loan for trade against some imaginary fines you've been inventing. Brenda's face turned a shade of purple that matched her overpriced yoga pants. The air between us felt thick, charged with the kind of static that precedes a lightning strike. You think you're above the rules? Yes. Her breath smelling faintly of kale and entitlement. We'll see what the authorities have to say about an unregistered, non-compliant vehicle being used to intimidate residents. Call the non-emergency line. Tell them there's a hostile neighbor threatening us with a dangerous vehicle. I watched as the kid pulled out his iPhone, his thumb flying across the screen. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just leaned back against the garage door and felt the cool metal through my shirt. Do you really want to do this, Brenda? Beth? My voice dropping an octave. I gave her one last chance to see the cliff she was walking toward. She just smirked. Triumphant look that told me she thought she'd already won. 10 minutes later, the flashing blue and red lights of a patrol car splashed against the manicured lawns. Officer Miller looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He stepped out of the cruiser, squinting against the rising sun. What's the problem here? Jeff, rubbing his temples. Brenda launched into a theatrical performance that would have won a Razzie, claiming I was revving the engine to scare her son and that the bike was a stolen death trap that didn't belong in a civilized neighborhood. She even managed to squeeze out a fake tear. "Sir, I feel unsafe in my own driveway. Look at him. He's refusing to cooperate with the HOA board." The officer turned to me, his expression weary. "Sir, is this bike yours? Do you have the registration?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I pulled a heavy, manila envelope from the saddlebag. I didn't give it to the officer. I handed it to the person sitting in the black SUV that had pulled up silently behind the police car moments ago. The door opened, and a man in a sharp, charcoal suit stepped out. He didn't look like a neighbor. He looked like a shark in a world of goldfish. Brenda's smirk flickered. "Who's this?" she demanded, her voice losing its edge. "Is it?" Stepping forward so I was inches from her personal space. "Is Marcus Thorne. He's a senior state attorney, personal friend, and, more importantly, the person who's been reviewing the last 6 months of HOA financial records I sent him." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cicadas seemed to stop buzzing. Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "Good morning, Brenda." His voice as smooth and cold as a marble gravestone. "We've been looking for the person responsible for the special assessment funds that went missing from the community pool project last year. It's funny how the paper trail leads directly to a private account linked to your maiden name. And as for the bike, I've already verified the title. However, I'm much more interested in the harassment and attempted extortion charges we're about to discuss regarding your attempt to force a resident to hand over personal property under the guise of HOA fines." Brenda's jaw didn't just drop, it practically hit the pavement. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Tyler backed away from the bike like it had suddenly caught fire. But that's not. I was just enforcing the rules," she stammered, her voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. The officer's demeanor shifted instantly. He looked at Marcus, then at the documents, then back at Brenda. "Step away from the vehicle." His voice now devoid of any professional courtesy. Marcus leaned in, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. "You see, Brenda, when you use a position of power to bully people, you usually forget one thing: someone is always watching. And some of us don't like bullies." I climbed onto the Harley, the leather creaking under my weight. I looked at Brenda, who was now being escorted toward the patrol car as Marcus began explaining the specifics of the embezzlement investigation to the officer. The queen of the cul-de-sac was crumbling in real time, her carefully constructed world of beige paint and iron-fisted control evaporating in the morning sun. I kicked the engine over. The roar was louder this time. The triumphant, mechanical scream of justice that vibrated through the very ground she stood on. I looked at Tyler, who looked terrified and small. "Learn a lesson from this," I shouted over the rumble. "You don't get things just because you want them, and you definitely don't get them by stepping on others." As I pulled out of the driveway, the wind hitting my face felt cleaner than it had in months. The smell of exhaust and freedom replaced the stench of Brenda's entitlement. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights fading in the distance. The neighborhood looked the same lawns, the same houses, but the atmosphere had shifted. The shadow was gone. Justice isn't always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes, it's the sound of a vintage engine drowning out a bully's lies. It's the moment the hunter becomes the prey because they were too arrogant to realize they were hunting a wolf. I shifted into second gear, feeling the power of the panhead surge beneath me. The road ahead was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, the air in this town finally felt like it belonged to everyone. Not just the ones with a clipboard and a grudge.